Today we're going to take a look at Section 2 of Chapter 15, how the crisis deepens between the North and the South. By the end of the section today, you should be able to explain how the Fugitive Slave Act and Uncle Tom's Cabin affected Northerners. We'll also be able to analyze the concept of popular sovereignty, pretty basic concept. We'll also be able to describe the violence that took place during Bleeding Kansas, and we will also evaluate the attack on Senator Sumner in the Senate. To start with one American story, Harriet Beecher Stowe was outraged when she heard about the part of the Compromise of 1850 that would help slaveholders recapture runaway slaves. She stated that the Christian men who passed this law cannot know what slavery is. Stowe's anger motivated her to write Uncle Tom's Cabin, which was a novel that portrayed slavery as being pretty brutal and immoral. In Section 2 today, we're going to take a look at how the Compromise of 1850 deepened the division between the North and the South. So to start with, the 1850 law to help slaveholders recapture runaway slaves was called the Fugitive Slave Act. People accused of being fugitives under this law could be held without an arrest warrant. In addition, they had no right to a jury trial. Instead, a federal commissioner ruled on each case. The commissioner received $5 for releasing the defendant and $10 for turning the defendant over to a slaveholder. Obviously, the commissioner is going to want to make more money, so a lot of people were turned over to slaveholders. Southerners felt the Slave Act was justified. They really liked it because they considered slaves to be property, but Northerners resented the Fugitive Slave Act because it required them to help recapture runaway slaves, and it placed fines on people who would not cooperate and even jail terms on people who helped the fugitives escape. In addition, Southern slave catchers roamed the North, sometimes capturing free African Americans. The presence of the slave catchers throughout the North brought home the issue of slavery to Northerners. They could no longer ignore the fact that by supporting the Fugitive Slave Act, they played an important role in supporting slavery. So they had a moral dilemma on their hands. Should they obey the law and support slavery, or should they break the law and oppose slavery? Pretty tough. Now here would be an example of a sign that you would see about the Fugitive Slave Act. It says, "Caution, colored people of Boston, one and all, you are hereby respectfully cautioned and advised to avoid conversing with the watchmen and police officers of Boston. For since the recent order of the mayor and aldermen, they are empowered to act as kidnappers and slave catchers. And they have already been actually employed in kidnapping, catching, and keeping slaves. Therefore, if you value your liberty and the welfare of the fugitives among you, shun them in every possible manner, as so many hounds in the track of the most unfortunate of your race. Keep a sharp lookout for kidnappers and have top eye open." That's from April 24th, 1851. So, Harriet Beecher Stowe published Uncle Tom's Cabin in 1852, and in a very dramatic way it portrayed the moral issues of slavery. In fact, there was a play based on the book that even increased the popularity of the drama as well as abolitionism. The book's main character was Uncle Tom, who was a respected older slave, and the plot centers around Tom's life under three owners. Two of the owners were very kind, but the third was cruel. The novel includes dramatic scenes such as the dangerous escape of a slave named Eliza and her baby across the Ohio River. Stowe's book was very popular in the North, but white Southerners believed the book falsely criticized the South and slavery. So here's an old copy of Uncle Tom's Cabin from the 1850s, and that's supposed to be a picture of Uncle Tom as he's portrayed in the book. Now, while the Fugitive Slave Act and Uncle Tom's Cabin heightened the conflicts between the North and the South, the issue of slavery in the territories brought bloodshed to the West. In 1854, Senator Stephen A. Douglas, who we've talked about from Illinois, he drafted a bill to organize territorial governments for the Nebraska Territory, and he thought it should be divided into two territories, Nebraska and Kansas. So to get Southern support for the bill, he suggested that the decision about whether to allow slavery in each of these territories be settled by popular sovereignty. By definition, popular sovereignty is a system where the residents vote to decide an issue. If this bill passed, it would result in getting rid of the Missouri Compromise by allowing people to vote for slavery in territories where the Missouri Compromise had banned it. As Douglas hoped, Southerners applauded the repeal of the Missouri Compromise and they supported the bill. Even though the bill angered opponents of slavery, it did pass, and it became known as the Kansas-Nebraska Act. Few people realized that the act would soon turn Kansas into a battleground over slavery. So here you can see what the nation looked like back then, and in this area right here, this is the Nebraska territory right here, and they divide it in half, and this part becomes the Kansas territory, which did have enough people to become a territory in the state pretty quick, and so we're going to vote on slavery using popular sovereignty. So we had pro-slavery and anti-slavery settlers that rushed into Kansas territory just west of Missouri to vote for this territorial legislature. At the time of the election in March of 1855, there were more pro-slavery settlers than anti-slavery settlers in the territory. But the pro-slavery forces did not want to risk losing the election, so they had 5,000 Missourians come across the border, and they voted in the election illegally. As a result, the official Kansas legislature was packed with pro-slavery representatives. Anti-slavery settlers boycotted this official government, and they formed their own government. With political authority in dispute, settlers on both sides armed themselves. In May, a pro-slavery mob attacked the town of Lawrence, Kansas, and the attackers destroyed offices and the house of the governor of the anti-slavery government. This attack came to be known as the Sack of Lawrence. So onto this scene came a guy named John Brown, who was a very extreme abolitionist. In order to avenge the sack of Lawrence, Brown and 7 other men went to the cabins of several of his pro-slavery neighbors, and they murdered 5 people. Now, this attack comes to be known as the Potawatomi Massacre because of the creek nearby where the victims were found. As news of the violence spread, civil war broke out in Kansas, and it continued for 3 years. The territory came to be called Bleeding Kansas. Now, John Brown is quite the historical figure. Right here is his actual picture on the left. He was a very tall, imposing man. And here on the right is an artist's rendering of what they thought John Brown actually was. He actually was a very outspoken man, and in 1837 he made a promise in a church in Ohio, and he said, "Here before God, in the presence of these witnesses, I consecrate my life to the destruction of slavery." Brown said that seeing a white man beat an enslaved child with a shovel made him hate slavery. Interestingly enough, though, Brown was the father of 20 children, and he oftentimes would beat them for little things, but he was a definite authoritarian. And you can see there he's acting godlike in that painting on the right with the clouds and the storm brewing in the background. You can see the Confederate flag and the American flag, so kind of portraying both sides. Now, while violence was spreading in Kansas in the spring of 1856, blood was also being shed in the nation's capital. In late May, Senator Charles Sumner of Massachusetts delivered a speech that attacked the pro-slavery forces in Kansas. His speech was packed with insults, and Sumner even made fun of A.P. Butler, who was a senator in South Carolina. Preston Brooks, a relative of Butler, heard about Sumner's speech, and in order to defend Butler in the South, he attacked Sumner, who was sitting at his desk. Brooks hit Sumner over the head with his cane, and Sumner really couldn't defend himself because his legs were trapped underneath his desk. Brooks hit him 30 times or more and actually broke his cane in the assault. A lot of Southerners cheered Brooks' defense of the South, but most Northerners were shocked at the violence in the Senate. Bleeding Kansas and Bleeding Sumner became rallying cries for anti-slavery Northerners and slogans for a new political party. So in the next section we will also talk about the creation of the Republican Party. But before we get there, here is a painting or drawing of Brooks attacking Sumner, and a lot of Americans, Northerners and Southerners alike, were getting pretty ashamed of the behavior that was taking place between Sumner and Brooks. But the tensions between the North and the South were so high at the time that a large number of Southerners cheered Brooks for his actions. A number of Brooks' supporters sent him new canes to replace the one he had broken while hitting Sumner on the head. Some of the canes were inscribed with mottos like, "Hit him again." And to kind of wrap this up, there was a House committee, the House of Representatives, investigated the caning affair, and they recommended that Brooks be expelled out of the House. Nevertheless, the House vote followed party and sectional lines and fell short of the needed 2/3 majority. Brooks did end up resigning his seat, and his only punishment was a $300 fine. In the South, Brooks was seen as a hero, but Northerners turned Sumner into a martyr. Sumner actually did not return to his Senate seat for 2.5 years. That's how badly he was beaten. So Pretty explosive events in Section 2. Like we talked about in Section 3 now, we will take a really strong, hard look at how the Republican Party forms. So we have that to look forward to.